Have you ever reached a point where it feels like life has taken everything from you? One woman did. She lost the people she loved, had nowhere to call home, and was preparing for another lonely night with no hope left. But what happened when a quiet rancher crossed her path would change her life forever. His unexpected act of kindness not only saved her from sleeping outside, it revealed a secret that would leave an entire town speechless. Stay with us until the end, because this true-to-heart story proves that one moment of compassion can change everything. There was a time when Emily Carter believed her life would always be filled with laughter, family dinners, and simple dreams. She had never wanted riches or fame. All she ever wished for was a peaceful life surrounded by the people she loved most. For years, that dream seemed real. She lived in a small town where everyone knew one another, and every morning began with hope for the future. Emily worked at a local bookstore, a place she adored because it allowed her to spend her days surrounded by stories and friendly faces. Her husband, Daniel, was a hard-working mechanic known for helping anyone in need. Together, they had built a life that wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Their small home was always warm, and their evenings were often spent talking about the future, while their young daughter, Lily, filled the rooms with endless energy and laughter. To Emily, happiness was found in the little things. It was in the sound of Lily's footsteps running through the hallway. It was in Daniel's smile when he returned home from work. It was in the family traditions they created together, from weekend picnics to movie nights on the living room couch. She often thought she was one of the luckiest people alive. But life has a way of changing without warning. It began with a phone call that arrived on an ordinary afternoon. Emily was organizing books at work when her phone rang. The moment she answered, she knew something was wrong. A serious accident had occurred on a highway outside town. Daniel had been involved. The world seemed to stop moving. Hours later, she sat in a hospital waiting room, praying for a miracle. Doctors did everything they could, but the injuries were too severe. Before the sun rose the next morning, Daniel was gone. The loss shattered her. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Emily tried to stay strong for Lily. She forced herself out of bed every morning and continued working despite the grief that followed her everywhere. She told herself that as long as she had her daughter, she could survive anything. Then fate struck again. One winter, Lily became seriously ill. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a seasonal sickness, but her condition worsened rapidly. Emily spent countless nights by her daughter's bedside, hoping and praying for recovery. She held Lily's hand and promised that everything would be okay. Yet some promises are impossible to keep. The day Emily lost her daughter was the day a part of her heart disappeared forever. The house that once felt full of life suddenly became silent. Every room carried memories she could barely endure. Lily's favorite toys remained untouched. Her drawings still hung on the refrigerator. The emptiness was overwhelming. As grief consumed her, keeping up with everyday responsibilities became harder. Medical bills piled up, savings disappeared. The bookstore where she worked eventually closed its doors after struggling financially. In a matter of months, Emily lost not only her source of income, but also one of the few places that still gave her a sense of purpose. She searched desperately for another job. She attended interviews and filled out applications wherever she could. But opportunities were scarce, and her emotional exhaustion made every challenge feel impossible. Each rejection chipped away at the small amount of hope she had left. The bills continued arriving. Soon, she fell behind on mortgage payments. She tried negotiating with lenders and asking for more time, but the debts kept growing. The stress became unbearable. Every day brought another warning letter, another reminder that her life was falling apart piece by piece. Then came the notice she feared most. She stared at the paper with trembling hands. The house she had shared with Daniel and Lily would be taken away. The home filled with memories, laughter, and love was no longer hers. As the sun set outside her window that evening, Emily sat alone in the quiet living room. Around her were photographs of happier times, reminders of everything she had lost. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the painful truth. The people she loved were gone. Her job was gone. And now, even the place she called home was slipping away. For the first time in her life, Emily had no idea what tomorrow would bring. A few weeks later, Emily stood on the sidewalk across from the house that had once been her home. The front door was closed, the curtains drawn, and the windows reflected a life that no longer belonged to her. Everything she could carry fit into 2 worn bags, resting beside her feet. She had never imagined her life would come to this. For a long time, she simply stood there, staring at the place where so many memories had been made. She remembered Lily laughing in the front yard. She remembered Daniel fixing things in the garage while music played from an old radio. Every corner of the house held a piece of her heart. Now, it belonged to someone else. With nowhere to go, Emily spent her first night in a cheap motel on the edge of town. She used the last of her savings to pay for the room. As she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she told herself things would get better soon. She would find work. She would get back on her feet. This was only temporary. But the days turned into weeks. Job interviews led nowhere. Employers wanted experience she didn't have, or workers who could start immediately without personal struggles weighing them down. Some never called her back. Others offered polite smiles before choosing someone else. Each rejection felt heavier than the last. When her money finally ran out, the motel manager apologized and explained he could no longer let her stay. Emily understood. It wasn't personal. Business was business. Still, carrying her bags out of that room felt like crossing an invisible line she never thought she would cross. For the first time in her life, she had nowhere to sleep. At first, she tried staying in public places during the day and finding sheltered spots at night. She sat in libraries, parks and bus stations, trying not to attract attention. She carefully rationed every dollar she earned from occasional temporary work. But survival was harder than she had imagined. There were days when she skipped meals because she couldn't afford food. There were nights when cold winds cut through her thin jacket, making sleep nearly impossible. Sometimes she woke up startled by unfamiliar noises and spent hours watching the darkness around her. The loneliness was often worse than the hunger. People passed by every day without looking at her. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Others glanced at her briefly before walking away. A few whispered things that stung more than they realized. They didn't know her story. They didn't know she had once been a wife, a mother, a homeowner, and a hard-working employee. To them, she was just another struggling stranger. One afternoon, while sitting on a park bench, Emily watched families enjoying the sunshine. Children ran across the grass while parents laughed nearby. The scene reminded her of everything she had lost. For a moment, she felt the familiar ache in her chest. She missed Lily's laughter. She missed Daniel's steady voice. She missed feeling like she belonged somewhere. As the weeks passed, her hope began to fade. The future looked like a long road with no destination. Every morning felt the same. Wake up, search for work, find food, survive the day, repeat. The cycle seemed endless. Then winter arrived. Temperatures dropped sharply, and the nights became brutally cold. Even people with warm homes complained about the weather. For Emily, each evening became a challenge she wasn't sure she could overcome. One night, freezing rain began falling shortly after sunset. She found a small covered area near an old building and curled up with her bags beside her. Her hands trembled from the cold. Her clothes were damp, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her body. As rain tapped against the pavement, Emily pulled her jacket tighter and stared into the darkness. She wondered how much longer she could keep going. For the first time, she felt completely invisible, completely forgotten, and completely alone. Then, through the rain and the fading light, she noticed headlights slowing down on the road nearby. A pickup truck was pulling over, and before she knew it, someone was stepping out and walking directly toward her. Emily's first instinct was fear. As the pickup truck came to a stop near the curb, She immediately looked away and pulled her jacket tighter around herself. Experience had taught her to be cautious. Over the past several months, she had encountered all kinds of people. Some ignored her completely. Others treated her with pity. A few had made promises they never intended to keep. She wasn't interested in another disappointment. Rain continued falling as a tall figure stepped out of the truck. The man paused briefly, studying the situation before slowly approaching. He didn't rush toward her. He didn't shout questions from a distance. Instead, he walked with a calmness that somehow felt different. Emily kept her eyes on the ground. She hoped he would simply move on. But the footsteps stopped a few feet away. "Evening," the man said gently. His voice carried none of the judgment she had grown used to hearing. Emily hesitated before responding. "Evening." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The man looked to be in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. Years of outdoor work showed in his weathered face and rough hands. His denim jacket was soaked from the rain, yet he seemed unconcerned by it. "I'm Jack Callahan," he finally said. Emily nodded politely. "Emily," Jack glanced toward the dark clouds overhead. "Pretty rough night to be out here." Emily forced a small smile. "I've had worse." The answer made Jack frown slightly. Nobody should have been able to say those words so casually. He looked at the bags beside her. "Have you eaten?" Emily immediately shook her head. "I'm fine." The response came automatically. She had said those same words dozens of times before. Fine, even when she wasn't. Jack seemed to recognize the difference. Without another question, he walked back to his truck. Emily watched nervously. A moment later, he returned carrying a paper bag and a large cup. "I was headed home from town," he said. "Stopped for dinner earlier. Bought more than I needed." He held out the bag. Emily stared at it. The smell of warm food drifted through the cool air. Her stomach growled before she could stop it. Embarrassment washed over her face. Jack pretended not to notice. Finally, she accepted the bag with trembling hands. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Inside was a sandwich, fruit, and a small container of soup that was still warm. For the first time in days, Emily felt something other than despair. Simple kindness. She ate slowly while Jack stood nearby. Most people would have left by now, but he didn't seem in any hurry. "What happened?" he asked quietly. The question wasn't demanding. It wasn't intrusive. It sounded like someone genuinely wanted to know. Emily looked down at the food. For a long moment, she considered refusing to answer. Then the words started coming. She told him about Daniel, about Lily, about the hospital rooms, the funeral services, the bills, the lost job, and the house she could no longer call home. She didn't share every detail, but she shared enough. Jack listened without interrupting. The rain continued falling around them as Emily spoke. When she finally finished, silence settled between them. Most people responded to stories like hers with awkward sympathy or uncomfortable silence. Jack simply nodded, as though he understood that some losses could never be fixed with words. "I'm sorry," he said. Emily looked away. "So am I." For several moments, neither spoke. Then Jack glanced toward the road. "My ranch is about 30 minutes from here." Emily stiffened immediately. The offer she feared was coming. Every warning she'd ever heard echoed through her mind. Jack seemed to notice her reaction. "I have a spare cabin," he continued carefully. "Nothing fancy. Just a warm place." Emily's heart raced. "No." The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Jack nodded. "I figured you'd say that." Emily expected him to argue. Instead, he simply accepted her response. That surprised her. Most people pushed. Most people insisted. Jack didn't. He respected the boundary. A few minutes later, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. It contained a phone number and a ranch address. He placed it beside her. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight." Emily looked at the card. "Then why give it to me?" Jack stared out at the rain-covered street. Because everyone deserves options. The words struck her harder than she expected. Everyone deserves options. For months, life had felt like one closed door after another, one loss after another, one dead end after another. She had almost forgotten what options felt like. Jack turned toward his truck. "Take care of yourself, Emily." She watched him walk away. Seconds later, the engine started. The pickup slowly disappeared into the rain. Emily looked down at the card resting in her hand. Part of her wanted to throw it away immediately. Trusting strangers was dangerous. Hope was dangerous too. But as the cold wind swept through the night and the rain continued falling, she found herself staring at the address again. And for the first time in months, a small question entered her mind. What if this man was different? Emily barely slept that night. The rain continued for hours, drumming against the pavement and soaking the city streets. She sat beneath the small shelter, clutching her bags close to her chest, while Jack's business card rested safely inside her jacket pocket. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard his words again. Everyone deserves options. It was such a simple sentence, yet no one had spoken to her that way in a very long time. Most people treated her like a problem to avoid, or a burden they didn't want to carry. Jack hadn't looked at her with pity. He hadn't looked at her with judgment either. He had simply looked at her like she mattered. By morning, the rain had finally stopped. Emily walked through town, as she always did, searching for temporary work and trying not to think about how exhausted she felt. But the cold seemed sharper than usual, and the emptiness inside her felt heavier. Several times during the day, she pulled the card from her pocket. Several times, she almost threw it away. Yet somehow, she never did. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered once again. A strong wind swept through the streets. People hurried toward warm homes and heated cars. Emily watched them pass. For a moment, she imagined what it would feel like to walk through a front door and know she belonged there. The thought hurt more than she expected. By sunset, temperatures had dropped even lower than the night before. Emily found herself standing near an old gas station, staring at the ranch address printed on Jack's card. Her mind battled itself. What if it was a mistake? What if she couldn't trust him? What if she arrived and regretted it? But another voice inside her asked a different question. What if she didn't go? How many more nights could she survive like this? Finally, after nearly an hour of hesitation, Emily made a decision. She borrowed a phone from a store employee who took pity on her situation. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. "Jack speaking." For a second, Emily almost hung up. Instead, she swallowed hard. "It's Emily." There was a brief pause. Then warmth entered his voice immediately. "Emily, I'm glad you called." Something about those words caught her off guard. He sounded genuinely happy to hear from her, not surprised, not annoyed, happy. She took a deep breath. "Is that offer still open?" Jack didn't answer right away. For a moment, Emily worried she had waited too long. Then he said something unexpected. "It's open as long as you need it to be." Tears immediately filled her eyes. She quickly turned away from nearby people so they wouldn't see. No one had offered her certainty in months. No one had told her she didn't have to rush. No one had made her feel welcome. Jack gave her directions and promised to meet her at a small diner outside town. An hour later, Emily sat nervously inside the restaurant, warming her hands around a cup of coffee. When Jack arrived, he greeted her with the same calm kindness she remembered. No questions, no pressure, no conditions, just kindness. After a simple meal, they began the drive toward the ranch. The city lights slowly disappeared behind them. Dark fields stretched across the countryside. Emily stared out the window, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or the best decision she had made in months. Nearly 30 minutes later, they reached the property. The ranch was larger than she expected. Rolling pastures extended into the distance. Several horses stood inside fenced fields. A large red barn sat beneath the moonlight, and beyond it stood a small wooden cabin with a porch light glowing warmly against the darkness. Jack parked the truck. For several seconds, Emily simply stared. The light shining from the cabin windows looked almost unreal, safe, peaceful, like something from a life she no longer belonged to. Jack stepped out and carried one of her bags. "This way." Emily followed slowly. When they reached the cabin door, Jack handed her a key. She looked at it in confusion. "A key?" Jack nodded. "You're staying here." Emily glanced inside. The cabin was simple but beautiful. There was a bed, a couch, a small kitchen, fresh blankets, clean towels, everything she needed. The sight nearly overwhelmed her. She hadn't slept in a real bed for months. Jack placed her bag near the door. "If you need anything, my house is up the hill." Emily struggled to find words. "Why are you doing this?" Jack looked at her quietly. The answer seemed to come naturally. Because somebody should have done it sooner. Emily felt tears forming again. For months, she had been surviving one painful day at a time. For months, she had felt invisible, forgotten, alone. Yet here stood a man who owed her nothing. A man who had no reason to help. And still, he had opened a door when every other door had closed. Jack started toward the porch. Then he paused. "There are only 2 rules." Emily's stomach tightened slightly. "What are they?" A faint smile appeared on his face. "First, get some rest." Emily blinked. "And second," Jack looked directly at her, "stop believing you're alone." With that, he stepped outside and quietly closed the door behind him. Emily stood motionless in the center of the cabin. The room was silent, warm, safe. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't wondering where she would sleep. She wasn't worrying about the weather. She wasn't afraid. As tears rolled down her cheeks, she sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the little cabin. Then, for the first time since losing everything she loved, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The next morning, Emily woke up in complete silence. For a few moments, she didn't know where she was. The bed beneath her felt too comfortable. The room was too warm. There was no cold wind, no traffic noise, and no fear of being forced to leave before sunrise. Then she remembered. The ranch, Jack, the cabin. As reality settled in, she sat up slowly and looked around. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting golden patterns across the wooden floor. Outside the window, she could hear birds singing. It was a peaceful sound she hadn't heard in a very long time. Emily walked to the window and looked outside. The ranch stretched across the horizon, glowing beneath the morning sun. Horses grazed in distant fields, while a few cattle moved lazily across the pasture. Everything seemed calm. For the first time in months, her chest didn't feel tight with anxiety. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Jack standing on the porch holding a tray. "Morning," he said. Emily smiled. "Morning." Jack handed her the tray. Breakfast, fresh eggs, toast, fruit, and coffee. The smell alone made her stomach rumble. "You didn't have to do this." Jack shrugged. "Maybe not." A small smile crossed his face. "But I wanted to." Emily couldn't remember the last time someone had done something kind, simply because they wanted to. Jack pointed toward the fields. "If you're feeling up to it later, I'll be working near the barn." Emily nodded. "I might stop by." "Only if you want to." That was another thing she noticed about him. He never pressured her. After breakfast, Emily spent hours simply sitting on the porch. The peaceful surroundings felt almost unreal. For months, her life had been consumed by survival. Now, for the first time, She had space to think, space to breathe, space to heal. Later that afternoon, curiosity led her toward the barn. Jack was repairing a fence with the help of an older ranch hand named Frank. When Frank noticed Emily approaching, he tipped his hat politely. "Good afternoon." Emily smiled nervously. "Hello." Unlike many people she had encountered over the past year, Frank didn't ask uncomfortable questions. He didn't stare. He treated her like any other person. The simple gesture meant more than he could possibly know. Over the next several days, Emily began spending more time around the ranch. At first, she only watched. Then she started helping with small tasks: cleaning equipment, organizing supplies, feeding animals. Nothing complicated, nothing demanding. But every completed task gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. The ranch slowly became part of her daily routine. Each morning began with coffee on the porch. Each afternoon brought simple work. Each evening ended with peaceful conversations beneath the stars. Jack never pushed her to discuss her past. Yet somehow, he always seemed to know when she needed someone to listen. One evening, they sat near a small fire outside the cabin. The sky above them glittered with countless stars. Emily stared into the flames. "I used to think my life was over." Jack remained quiet. She continued. "After Daniel and Lily died, everything felt empty." Her voice cracked slightly. "I stopped seeing a future." Jack poked at the fire gently. "That's understandable." Emily shook her head. "No, it isn't." Jack looked at her. "Why not?" She stared into the darkness. "Because I gave up." The words felt painful to admit. Jack considered them carefully. Then he spoke. "No." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "You didn't give up." She looked at him in confusion. Jack gestured toward the ranch around them. "If you'd given up, you wouldn't still be here." Emily remained silent. Jack continued. "You survived things that would break most people." The words settled deep inside her. For months, she had viewed herself as weak, broken, defeated. Yet Jack saw something different: strength. The possibility felt strange, but also comforting. As the weeks passed, Emily's confidence slowly returned. Her smile appeared more often. Her laughter occasionally surfaced during conversations. The sadness never disappeared completely. Some wounds don't heal that quickly. But the darkness that once consumed her no longer controlled every moment. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Emily was helping organize old storage boxes inside a section of the barn, rarely used anymore. Dust covered nearly everything. Most of the boxes contained tools, paperwork, and forgotten ranch supplies. As she lifted one container onto a nearby shelf, a small wooden box hidden behind it slipped loose and fell to the floor. The lid popped open. Several old photographs spilled across the ground. Emily knelt to pick them up. At first, she thought nothing of them. Then she froze. One photograph immediately caught her attention. Her heart skipped a beat. The image showed a much younger Jack standing beside another man. A man Emily recognized instantly. It was impossible. Her hands began trembling. Because the person standing beside Jack in that photograph looked exactly like her late husband, Daniel. Emily stared at the picture in disbelief. And at that moment she realized the ranch might be hiding a secret neither of them knew existed. Emily stared at the photograph, unable to look away. Her hands trembled as she carefully brushed the dust from its surface. The picture was old, its edges faded from time, but the faces were still clear. One was Jack, much younger than he was now, but unmistakably Jack. The other man looked so much like Daniel that Emily felt her heart pounding against her chest. For a moment, she questioned herself. Maybe grief was playing tricks on her. Maybe she wanted to see Daniel so badly that her mind was filling in the details. But the resemblance was impossible to ignore. The same eyes, the same smile. Even the way he stood looked familiar. Emily quickly gathered the remaining photographs and carried them outside. Jack was repairing a gate near the pasture when she approached. He immediately noticed the concern on her face. Everything okay? Emily held out the photograph. Who's this? Jack took the picture and looked down at it. The moment he saw it, his expression changed. A mixture of surprise and sadness crossed his face. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he smiled softly. I haven't seen this picture in years. Emily pointed toward the younger man. Who is he? Jack's eyes remained fixed on the photograph. His name was Michael. Emily felt a chill run through her. Michael? Jack nodded. My younger brother. The answer surprised her. She had never heard Jack mention any family. What happened to him? For a long moment, Jack stared toward the distant fields. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. We lost contact many years ago. Emily frowned. You lost contact? Jack nodded slowly. When we were young, we were close. But life took us in different directions. We argued, said things we shouldn't have said. Regret filled his eyes. Eventually, he left. Emily listened carefully. Jack continued. I always believed we'd make things right someday. His voice grew heavier. But someday never came. A painful silence followed. Did you ever find him? Jack shook his head. No. Emily looked back at the photograph. The resemblance suddenly made more sense. Yet questions continued forming in her mind. How long ago was this? Almost 30 years. Emily's heart raced. Daniel had rarely spoken about his childhood. Whenever family came up, he usually changed the subject. At the time, she never thought much about it. Now she wondered why. That evening, Emily returned to the cabin carrying the photograph. She sat at the small kitchen table for hours, thinking, remembering, questioning. Eventually, she opened one of the few boxes she had managed to keep from her old life. Inside were personal belongings she couldn't bear to throw away. Photographs, letters, keepsakes, memories. Carefully, she sorted through them. Then she found it. An old picture of Daniel taken years before they met. Emily placed it beside the ranch photograph. The similarities were undeniable. The more she compared them, the more certain she became. Daniel and Michael weren't merely similar. They appeared to be the same person. Her pulse quickened. Could Daniel have changed his name? Why would he do that? And if he had, did that mean Jack had unknowingly spent years helping the widow of his own nephew? The possibility seemed unbelievable. The next morning, Emily drove into town and visited a public records office. She wasn't entirely sure what she was searching for, only that she needed answers. Hours passed as she reviewed old documents. Most led nowhere. Then she found something, a marriage record. Daniel's legal name appeared exactly as she remembered, but attached to the file was an older document from decades earlier, a name change record. Emily stared at it. Her breath caught. Before becoming Daniel Carter, her husband had been legally registered as Michael Callahan. The room suddenly felt smaller. Everything became clear. Daniel had never spoken about his family because he had been carrying an old wound, a broken relationship, a painful past. For reasons she still didn't fully understand, he had left home, changed his name, and started a completely new life. And neither he nor Jack had ever found a way back to each other. Tears filled Emily's eyes. The tragedy of it all felt overwhelming. Two brothers had spent decades apart, both believing reconciliation would happen someday. Yet someday had never arrived. That afternoon, Emily returned to the ranch carrying copies of the records. Her heart pounded with every step toward Jack's house. This wasn't just her secret anymore. It belonged to him too. She found Jack sitting on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the horses. He smiled when he saw her approaching, but the smile slowly faded when he noticed the expression on her face. Emily? She sat beside him. For a moment, words refused to come. Finally, she handed him the documents. Jack adjusted his glasses and began reading. Seconds passed. Then a minute. His hands started shaking. His eyes moved back and forth across the page, again and again, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Finally, he looked up. Tears had already formed in his eyes. Michael! His voice barely escaped as a whisper. Emily nodded. Jack looked down at the records once more, then at the photograph. Then back at Emily. The truth had become impossible to deny. The brother he had spent 30 years searching for, the brother he thought he would never see again, had been Daniel. And the woman sitting beside him wasn't just a guest anymore. She was family. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They simply sat together in silence, absorbing a truth that had arrived far too late. Yet neither realized that another discovery was still waiting. A discovery hidden among Michael's old belongings. One that would change everything they thought they knew about the past. The days following the discovery were filled with emotions neither Emily nor Jack could fully describe. For Jack, the truth was both a gift and a heartbreak. For 30 years, he had wondered what became of his younger brother. He had imagined countless possibilities, hoping that somewhere, somehow, Michael was living a good life. Now he finally had his answer. But it had arrived far too late. More than once, Emily found Jack sitting alone on the porch, holding the old photograph. Sometimes he smiled at the memory. Other times, tears quietly filled his eyes. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, Jack finally spoke about the past. "I should have gone after him." Emily looked up from her chair. "What?" Jack stared across the pasture. "After our argument," his voice carried years of regret. "I kept telling myself there would be time." Emily remained silent. Jack continued. "I thought he'd cool down. I thought I'd call him next week, then next month, then next year." He shook his head slowly. But life doesn't wait. The words hung heavily in the air. Emily understood exactly what he meant. Too many people assume there will always be another chance, another conversation, another tomorrow. But life doesn't make those promises. A few days later, Jack invited Emily into the main house. "I want to show you something." Curiosity followed her as he led her upstairs. They stopped in front of a small storage room. Jack unlocked the door. Inside were dozens of old boxes that hadn't been touched in years. "My father's things," he explained. "I've never had the heart to sort through them." Emily nodded. Together they began carefully opening boxes. Most contained family photographs, letters, old newspapers, and ranch records. Hours passed. Then something unexpected happened. Emily opened a worn leather case hidden beneath a stack of books. Inside were several unopened envelopes. The handwriting immediately caught Jack's attention. His face turned pale. "I know that writing." Emily carefully handed him one of the envelopes. Jack's fingers trembled. The sender's name was written in the corner. Michael Callahan. Jack stared at it in disbelief. The letters had never been opened, never read, never answered. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jack carefully opened the first envelope. The letter inside was dated 28 years earlier. As he began reading, tears formed in his eyes. "Jack," the letter began, "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I hope you do." Jack stopped. His voice broke. Emily placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. After gathering himself, he continued reading. Michael explained that he regretted their argument. He missed his brother. He wanted to reconnect. He wanted to come home, but he wasn't sure how. There were more letters. Each one carried the same message: hope, regret, love, a desire to repair what had been broken. The final letter was written only months before Daniel met Emily. In it, Michael shared his new life, his plans, and his hope that one day the brothers would sit together again. Neither of them realized the letters had never reached Jack. Years earlier, Jack's father had secretly hidden them. Still angry over the family conflict, he had chosen not to deliver them. A single decision had changed the course of two lives. The realization devastated Jack. All those years, all those missed opportunities, all those chances stolen by a secret neither brother knew existed. Yet amid the heartbreak came something unexpected: peace. For the first time, Jack knew the truth. Michael hadn't hated him. Michael hadn't forgotten him. His brother had spent years trying to come back. That knowledge healed a wound Jack had carried for decades. As they continued sorting through the leather case, Emily discovered one final envelope. Unlike the others, it was addressed to "My future family." Inside was a handwritten note. Michael explained that if anything ever happened to him, he wanted future generations to know something important. Family matters more than pride. more than arguments, more than old mistakes. He wrote that love should never be postponed because tomorrow is never guaranteed. By the time Jack finished reading, tears streamed down both their faces. The room fell silent. Then Jack folded the letter carefully and looked at Emily. "You know," he said softly, "Michael would be proud of you." Emily blinked. "What do you mean?" Jack smiled. "After everything you've survived, you still found the strength to keep going." Emotion tightened her throat. For so long, she had viewed herself as someone who lost everything, someone broken by life. Yet sitting there, surrounded by the memories of people who loved deeply and forgave freely, she began to see herself differently, not as a victim, but as a survivor. In the weeks that followed, news of the discovery spread through the small community. People were amazed by the story. Many visited the ranch to hear it firsthand. Some brought food, others offered help, and many left inspired by the extraordinary connection that had reunited a family after decades apart. But what surprised everyone most came several weeks later. At a community gathering held at the ranch, Jack stood before friends, neighbors, and longtime residents. Then he made an announcement that left the entire crowd speechless. An announcement that would forever change Emily's future and prove that sometimes the greatest families are the ones life brings together when you least expect it. The crowd gathered beneath the warm glow of string lights stretched across the ranch yard. Neighbors, friends, and local families filled rows of folding chairs while children played nearby. Laughter drifted through the evening air, and for the first time in a very long while, the ranch felt like the center of something special. Emily stood near the barn, watching the gathering with a quiet smile. Just a few months earlier, she had been sitting alone in the cold, wondering where she would sleep. Now she was surrounded by people who knew her name, people who cared whether she showed up, people who treated her like family. The change still felt unbelievable. As the conversation slowly quieted, Jack stepped onto a small wooden platform that had been set up near the barn. Everyone turned toward him. Those who knew Jack well could immediately tell something important was on his mind. He adjusted the microphone and smiled at the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight." A chorus of greetings and applause answered him. Jack nodded appreciatively. Then his expression grew more serious. "Most of you know the story by now." The crowd became silent. Jack glanced toward Emily. Months ago, he would never have imagined this moment, neither would she. "When I stopped my truck on that rainy night," he continued, "I thought I was helping a stranger." Emily felt emotion rising in her chest. Jack smiled gently. "But life has a funny way of surprising us." Several people nodded. They all knew what he meant. The discovery of Michael's identity had touched nearly everyone who heard it. Some called it fate. Others called it a miracle. Jack simply called it family. He looked directly at Emily. "But the truth is, she helped me just as much as I helped her." The crowd listened carefully. "For years, I carried regret." His voice softened. "I thought my brother left this world believing I didn't care." Jack paused. "But because of Emily, I learned the truth." Emotion filled his eyes. "I learned that Michael never stopped loving his family." Many people wiped tears from their faces. The story had touched the entire community. Jack took a deep breath. "That knowledge gave me peace." Then he smiled. And peace is one of the greatest gifts a person can receive. Emily felt tears forming. She had never expected to become part of someone's healing. Yet somehow, that was exactly what had happened. The crowd applauded warmly. When the applause faded, Jack reached into his jacket pocket. The gesture immediately caught everyone's attention. He removed a folded document. Then he looked toward Emily again. "There's one more thing." The yard became completely silent. Emily felt her heart begin to race. She had no idea what was coming. Jack unfolded the paper carefully. "Several weeks ago, I met with my attorney." Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. Emily frowned. Jack smiled. "I spent a lot of time thinking about family." He glanced toward the ranch, the fields, the barn, the home he had spent decades building. Then he looked back at Emily. And I realized something. His voice was steady. Family isn't always about blood. The crowd nodded. Sometimes family is the person who shows up when life falls apart. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Sometimes family is the person who reminds you that hope still exists. Jack held up the document. That's why I've made a decision. Emily could barely breathe. Jack smiled warmly. Emily Carter is no longer a guest on this ranch. The crowd looked between them. Then Jack continued. She is family. Applause erupted immediately, but Jack wasn't finished. He waited for the noise to settle. Then he spoke the words that stunned everyone. I've officially transferred ownership of the cabin and part of this property into Emily's name. The crowd gasped. Several people covered their mouths in surprise. Emily stood frozen. She couldn't believe what she had heard. Jack walked toward her. You'll always have a home here. Tears streamed down her face. Jack. His smile widened. No more wondering where you'll sleep. The words instantly reminded her of the night they met, the night everything changed. No more facing the future alone. Emily shook her head in disbelief. She couldn't find words. For so long, she had lost everything. Her husband, her daughter, her home, her career, her sense of belonging. One tragedy after another had convinced her that happiness was gone forever. Yet standing before her now was proof that life still held unexpected gifts. Jack opened his arms. Emily stepped forward and embraced him tightly. The crowd erupted into applause. Many openly cried. Others smiled through their tears. Because everyone understood they were witnessing something rare. A second chance. Not the kind that erases pain, not the kind that changes the past, but the kind that changes the future. Months later, Emily continued helping manage the ranch. The cabin became her permanent home. She organized community events, helped local families in need, and created a small support program for people facing homelessness and hardship. She never forgot where she had come from, and she never forgot the kindness that saved her. Whenever someone asked why she worked so hard to help others, she always gave the same answer. Because one person believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Over time, the program grew. Dozens of people found assistance. Some found jobs. Others found housing. Many simply found hope. And every success reminded Emily of that rainy night when a pickup truck stopped beside the road. The night a rancher chose compassion over convenience. Years later, visitors to the ranch would often hear the story. A story about loss. A story about forgiveness. A story about family. But most of all, a story about hope. Because hope has a remarkable way of appearing when it seems completely gone. Sometimes it arrives as a second chance. Sometimes it arrives as an unexpected reunion. And sometimes it arrives in the form of a kind rancher who stops his truck, offers a helping hand, and changes a life forever. The lesson Emily carried for the rest of her days was simple. No matter how dark life becomes, never assume your story is over. The next chapter may be waiting just around the corner. And one act of kindness can change everything. Sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness to change a life forever. If Emily's story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who could use a little hope today. And before you go, tell us in the comments, do you believe one kind person can change someone's life? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.